So I know that Dr. Foreman is not able to be here tonight, and Marianne McCarthy is not able to be here tonight. Kevin Kane has very nicely sent Nurse Agnes Silveri in his stead, and John Nagel, a liaison from the Board of Commissioners, is not here. So if we could look at your minutes, and I had gone through the minutes and made a sort of first round of corrections, so that's what you have that was just given out to you. So I don't know if you actually have time to look at it. If there's a motion to accept the minutes?
Accept.
A second?
I'll second that.
And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay. Does any, I mean, I have actually several announcements, but I might kind of say them for new business to get to the B's presentation and have them afterwards. But do people have brief announcements they would like to make? No? Okay. Then we'll move on to the health officer's report.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the public. Good afternoon to the board. In addition to my normal food safety inspections, of which partly due to the days of snow, we did 14 food safety inspections. We also processed the 25 outdoor dining renewal applications. We had a few citizen concerns, one of which was grease buildup in sewer laterals, which is important in that we have to be mindful when we deal with restaurants and when we look at their menus, what happens with that residual grease when they're done, to make sure that it does not go down the drain and into the sewer laterals and then become a problem for our streams and into our township's sewer mains and becomes a problem for us. So that's one of the reasons why we do that. Under your information packet, you'll find the National Wellness Institute's March Health Observances. As far as the Radnor Township Board of Health wants to hear from you, we now have that up on the scroll for residents to see, and it does direct them to the website where they can email me at taltoan@radnor, radnor.org, and send me questions or topics that they would like to see the Board of Health address, and I will pass that on to the board by way of the chairman. So that is up and running now. On April the 5th, 2014, from 9 a.m. to noon at Harford Park, the Radnor Police Department and the Delaware County Kennel Club will be will have 100 free microchips available. Also, there'll be a stand there for people to register their dogs as required by the county. So that'll be April the 5th, 2014, from 9 to noon at Harford Park. The first 100 people get the free chips for their animals. Also in your packet, you'll see a summary of the current measles situation. In addition to that, you'll see provided to you by the Radnor Township Parks and Community Planning events of the 2014 planning for the different activities that they have scheduled for the year. One of which additional one that I put in there was the Wheels of Wayne, which is coming up soon. Also, the Katie Sampson lacrosse tournament, which is coming up, whereas the board wanted to be appraised of upcoming events. April the 16th, Give Kids a Smile Day. It's a program to help kids with their dental hygiene. You can call PCCY sponsors. The number is 215-563-5848. Also, this is one of the issues with that same organization that at least 2 of the Board of Commissioners have expressed concern, which is the Fighting Childhood Hunger, which there's going to be a meeting at the Chester City Hall on March the 26th, 2014. And again, 2 of the commissioners have expressed interest in that endeavor. And so the township manager had asked me to pass that along to see if if the board wanted to be interested in looking at this matter. Also,
Larry, are you going to that meeting?
I plan on it, yes. Yes. Also, the Delaware County Health Advisory Board will be holding a meeting that same day, which they do twice a year, to appraise the community of what they're doing. Dr. Vidian and Maureen Hennessy-Herman from Intercommunity Health usually are 2 of the speakers there. They typically have this meeting at night. I'm sort of really happy that they're having it in the daytime for once, so I can get home a little earlier. But I plan on attending that meeting. It's the same day, March the 26th, only earlier. Madam Chairman, Board, so is my report.
Thank you. I guess one of the sort of the disadvantages of having a board who, I think everybody is employed full-time, is that it's hard to get away for other meetings. So I'm very glad that you're able to get to both those meetings and can bring us up to speed at our next meeting. So that'll be really great. Thank you. Of course, I don't want to keep anybody from going to those meetings. I just know probably other people have commitments like I do. I was very impressed that there are 25 outdoor eating establishments. I think that's, gives a nice tone to the township. It's a pleasant thing. It's also a community safety thing. If you have people outdoors, you see what's going on. So I think it's a nice thing. Is that an increase since?
That is an increase because initially when the ordinance was passed, it was just for the one North Wayne Overlay Business District, and they have expanded it to its township-wide as long as they meet the criteria, which I'm very happy about, that it's township-wide.
Great. Does anyone have any other questions or comments for Larry?
No.
Isn't it amazing, Agnes? I don't know if you've ever heard before all the things that Mr. Taltone does, but it's very impressive.
Larry, I was just wondering, have you, now that the communication is open and yours is the email where all of the residents can ask questions, have you been getting swamped yet, or?
Yes. Well, not by this new venue, but it just as the job as a whole, it's busy. Busy is a good thing now.
Absolutely. I was actually just referencing the new open line of communication, but I drove around with you one day, and yes, you are stretched, that's for sure. But when you start getting some questions that come in, will you be doling those out to the board, or how are we going to handle that?
They'll come through the board through Mrs. Wishner, through the chairman. As I get them, I'll pass them along directly to her, and then she'll distribute issues as she sees fit.
And I just had one other comment about the microchip clinic on April 5th. That's a great thing to take advantage of. I'm glad that we're able to do that. I can't tell you, we take in a lot of strays for the township, or a lot of lost animals, and the ones that have microchips are usually home within an hour, but the ones that don't have microchips, we could literally be looking for them for weeks if we ever find them. So I think that's a great thing that everybody should definitely take advantage of if they can.
And is that just for dogs?
I don't know who's going to be administering the microchips, but the microchips, believe it or not, dogs, cats, we even have a few rabbits and some birds that have them too. So literally it can be for any species, but with birds, they do require some sedation. So probably I would just limit that to dogs and cats.
Yeah, I'm not certain whether it's for dogs or cats. If I can find that out.
Children? Teenagers?
Oh, go ahead. Larry, I know you've been sharing with us some of the updates on the rabies cases in Radnor, and I even saw some news media around the topic. And I think some of the tests were still outstanding, and you were awaiting the results of those. Have any of those come back? And can you give us an update of where things stand?
Yeah, there actually has been no change. What in fact did happen was we had one raccoon that did test positive. That was the first species. That was an incident where a raccoon, it's kind of questionable whether it actually had any contact or not. The lady said it absolutely did not. Someone who witnessed it said that it did. You have to go by what she says. If she says she didn't have contact, she didn't, you can't force it. But anyway, that raccoon did test positive for rabies. About a week later, we had a fox that was in the Ramblewood section of the township that was acting a little weird there. Police responded, and they subsequently we had it tested. It came back as positive for rabies. Separate part of the township. Within a week, it raised the concern level. We then had a skunk that a person observed during the daytime on a Saturday, I believe it was. And then on the Sunday, the following day, the skunk was found dead. So we had it tested. It came back negative. We had a second raccoon, I believe it was, that I'm not certain of its location. It came back negative. And I think there was one that was prepared and taken today, so we don't know the results of that one. Certainly, we can't talk about these things without giving our own Dr. Donato kudos, who does the preparation and for all these animals for the township. Without him, we couldn't have a successful program. But that's the update.
And Dr. Donato, rabies is in mammals? Oh.
Yeah, rabies is only found in mammals.
I guess just to go, I mean, of course, we have to assume any stray may, that's why we try and train our children not to go look at any cute little baby whatevers that they find. But I guess most commonly, in terms of what ends up coming into contact with humans, it tends to be foxes, raccoons, skunks, bats, of course. What are the other things that most commonly people, and of course dogs and cats, and I think I've seen wolves, some.
Yeah, the most common are raccoons by far. And then usually fox and cats are number 2 and 3, depending on, the year, but they usually jockey for position. And then skunks and bats, and then some of the more, or the less common creatures that get rabies are further down, and usually those numbers are in single digits for the whole state. Yeah.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, if a community member saw an animal acting strangely, what would be the proper sequence of who to notify?
Call 911.
And they would not be liable for the cost of getting the animal? Because I had a community member ask me, would they have to pay for the animal being removed?
I would consider that an emergency, it's my understanding.
I've never heard of anyone getting.
I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe you would be charged anything.
I guess, on the other hand, if you have, raccoons that have made a home in your house and you have no particular reason to think they're ill. I think just to get them out of your house, so I don't believe that's something the township would do.
No, we don't do that. You would have to call an exterminator or wildlife person.
There's a gray area, as with many things, yes. Thank you very much, Larry. And thank you for, getting on the case and getting the communication channel opened up. Appreciate that. So we're set with that. In terms of old business, I put on the agenda just the Radnor Health Matters, things that I could remember. And at this point, so Linda, you and Marianne McCarthy on adolescent suicide, whenever Marianne feels adequate time has gone by from the mental health panel, and that you also were going to do women's cardiac health, right?
Yes, so I met with some people at Bryn Mawr Hospital, a physician and a physician's assistant, and we have an outline and a date for taping that in early April.
Excellent. Okay. And Dr. Saldivar, your topic is family health, and you and I and a health educator from where you work are going to set up a time with Mr. Doling to tape that, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We have a talk that we like to give to the community. We've given it at the JCC before and at Whole Foods in the past. It's really about healthy eating and exercise for all members of the family. So it'll be good.
Excellent. And then I have a program on breastfeeding. Now, my people, I know they have a very large webinar they're doing tomorrow. So after tomorrow, I will be able to schedule it with them. And Dr. Foreman and Dr. Rabinowitz, Dr. Foreman is aware that he needs to schedule that. And if there were other ideas for Radnor Health Matters, I was not remembering them. Were there other things in particular people were thinking of doing for Radnor Health Matters? Or if you think of them, feel free to act on them and set up a taping. And don't let me hold you back. The mental health panel, I was just sort of keeping on the agenda to keep it on our agenda. I don't know of anything that's happened since then. Are you aware of anything in the schools? There was a mental health panel that Marianne McCarthy sat on and some people from the schools were on. And we were just kind of seeing if anything developed from it, but anyway. In terms of the communications, we were talking about another way we wanted to communicate was to develop a calendar, and my idea was to see if board members would be willing to find one event for which they would, or at least one, but hopefully, I don't think that's too much to ask, for which they would volunteer to go and represent the board and either do some combination of sitting at a table or circulating in the crowd and introducing yourself, sort of whatever felt comfortable to you, and maybe try some different things and see what works, to see if there are things that come up from just talking to people in that informal way, if there are issues that they would like to see the board address. So, Amy, I think you were kind enough to either volunteer or be volunteered to develop that calendar.
So I took an email that Larry had sent to you to our group that had the Radnor Township community events for 2014, and I organized them by month, put them in this handy dandy Word document. I found a few more when I was just searching around Radnor, and Linda, I found this one related to Bryn Mawr Hospital, the Chili Cancer Cook-Off community event. There may be more. I looked through. The others didn't seem as festival-y, but there may be more.
I reached out to our development person. It took me a couple weeks to figure out who it was, but I reached out to someone at Bryn Mawr Hospital who's responsible for events, mainline health, and locally. So she gave me a long list today, actually, of blood pressure screening and a whole bunch of things that are going on at Bryn Mawr and mainline health. But I hope to have her maybe give me big things that are happening once a month.
Sure. So we can add them to this list, and if anyone else knows of things, we can add them to this list. But for the most part, we have the date, the event, and the time and the location. A lot of the ones past May, at least for the Radnor events, didn't really list the time, but I'm sure as we got closer, we could figure that out.
We do have an official township table cover that says Board of Health, so you would be possible to sit someplace and be recognizable, and I think maybe even it'd be, you can even just make some kind of little sign, like tell us what you,
Yeah.
well, you know, something, the
Yeah.
way to communicate to
We
people
want
what
to
you're
hear from
interested in.
you or
And
something.
I think there are a number of handouts that are here. There's certainly a number of handouts I have from the American Academy of Pediatrics. You probably have from Bryn Mawr Hospital, also as far as general health information, as far as like having something on the table, why people might come over to you. Maybe
So
we could circulate that over the next month and maybe report at our next Board of Health meeting who has volunteered to do what. And
yeah, I can be a central point person for this list if you'd
Okay.
like. And if
Can you
there's something on
circulate
here-
it by email? Or do people
Yeah.
feel like that's reasonable to ask
I don't think
that
everybody
if,
has to
you know,
do it,
that
but if
you
you're
try and
interested,
do one
do
event?
one. Yeah.
I think that's reasonable. Mhm.
Not everyone has to do it, but if you're interested in, yeah, I think we could hit a couple of these, get some good feedback. And if you take a look at the list and there's a particular event that you'd like to go to, you can let me know. I'll start to fill it in and report back for next month. And then as it gets closer to that particular date, we can coordinate, you know, if you want a table versus you want a clipboard or you want materials, we can figure that out as we go.
Larry, do you have any suggestions how to make this work?
Certainly, all the ones on the list that I spoke to are very happy about the fact that the Board of Health wants to set up a table. I must apologize, though. My intention was to set up a table and have that tablecloth with the Board of Health here so that you would be able to see it, because it is in pretty good shape. But what I'll do is sometime this week, I'll have it set up, take a photo and send it around so that all the board can see it at least. I apologize for that. But most of the coordinators, it's just a matter of just contacting them and getting on board. Now, on the list that Dr. Leader sent around, I did put on there the Jazz Festival, which is usually the first or the second week in June, and that's a privately run sponsor, but they're very, very community responsible people, so I don't think that'd be a problem. Also, the Fall Festival is sponsored by the Wayne Business Association, so I don't think that would be a problem.
And are you in possession of the table cover?
I am.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Two brief things I just wanted to say. One is, under the old business, one of the things I said I was going to do was talk to Officer Flanagan, which I did. And he was very happy to, you know, talk with me representing the Board of Health. You know, I think is more than happy to do anything that we would like. And I said, of course, for him to think of us as a resource if there's anything that we can either provide any, you know, advice on or advocate for or whatever. So among the things he said, and the reason I was talking with him was to get his input about pedestrian, bike, car seat, prom safety, that whole arena of stuff. So he said that the things he sees most frequently in Radnor, the big problems they have are cars not stopping at the crosswalks for pedestrians, which I certainly can speak firsthand about. Pedestrians not realizing that if you're at and he's picked up Villanova University's particular problem area for this, pedestrians not, if there's a sign, if there's a crosswalk that has both a pedestrian sign and lights, the pedestrians don't realize they are supposed to wait for the pedestrian signal and not just supposed to go whenever the light says they can go. Now, one particular thing, and he said, one particular thing he asked from us, and I'm really glad you're here, Agnes, is he says they have a really great program that several of them have been trained in. That's one of the activities of Buckle Up Pennsylvania. That's called Survival 101. And he said in the past, they would go to schools, and this can be, you know, it's a free thing they do for private, parochial, and, you know, any schools in the township. It's a 45-minute program. It's sort of the gory stuff about what happens if you're not careful driving. And he said because it is fairly graphic that it's really for 16 and years and up. Yeah. Now, I know my kids saw it, now this would be several years ago, and they were both very impressed by it. And he says it does really, it is, it does really get to that sort of teen, I'm invincible type of thing. And so it's very underutilized. He said the last thing that happened with it was that they were told that the program took too long, but I think the periods are longer than 45 minutes.
I don't work at the high school level, but I can check.
Yeah, so, and if not, I think it certainly could be, and he said it could be broken down, but I thought the classes were 50 minutes. But,
45 minutes.
yeah, he said it's a 45-minute program. And, well, it's an activity of Buckle Up, Pennsylvania. This program is particular, is called Survival 101. And so he said, if we could help get it into the schools, that would be, that would be good, or get into schools again. Secondly, just FYI, I don't know if people saw this, but there was a death at Drexel University on Friday of that same strain of meningitis that has affected Princeton University and the University of California at Santa Barbara. So I guess, and at both those schools, they did get that Men-B vaccine that is in use in Europe and not yet FDA approved for this country. They did get that vaccine for those two schools and some special approval process. So I don't know, if Drexel will be moving in that direction or not, but, I guess we'll see. So that's just a FYI at this point. And I want to get to this presentation on bees, but I guess I just briefly wanted to reopen our e-cigarette discussion, because I don't know if people saw there was an editorial in the Philadelphia Inquirer early this week by Dr. Walter Sue, former president of the American Public Health Association and former commissioner of health in Philadelphia, and I forget, unfortunately, who his co-author was. And what we came to before, and where I was thinking before, was, that we don't have the data on it yet. And in talking with both, and there was also, I guess the other thing was there was an article in the health section, and in talking with both the reporter who wrote that article in the health section of the Inquirer and talking with Dr. Sue, there really is a split within the public health community on this issue. Those who, and I tend to put myself more on this side, as saying sort of, we really have to go by the science, and especially since I work in immunization, where we're always saying, go by the science. For something like this where we don't have the science, we don't have the science yet. On the other hand, and this is where I think my own thinking has changed about that it's different for schools, because where I'm coming to is a thing about whether I would think, and whether I would like the board to consider, that the schools fold in e-cigarettes into the current tobacco, sort of the no tobacco. And in fact, we had asked for whoever is the advisory group that develops regulations to relook at the tobacco regulation itself and change from the way it is currently written to make it a tobacco-free campus, rather than right now there's specific situations. So that's one thing, is just that. But the second thing have come more to is folding e-cigarettes into that. And the reason I feel like my thinking has been changing about it is that I feel like in talking to both these people, this idea that, one, anything other than air isn't great for you. So even if we don't have the science showing in what ways it's harmful for you, there's that. And secondly, I think in terms of schools, that sort of idea of an abundance of caution is a good idea. So I feel more strongly about sort of going with a precautionary recommendation, even though we don't have science definitely showing the harm of vaping, as I gather it is called now. There's smoking and there's vaping, because of this abundance of caution, and thinking that it'd be wise to get ahead of this on the schools and say that e-cigarettes, the thing with e-cigarettes that we talked about is they don't always have tobacco in them. They can have all kinds of other stuff in them. So in a sense, you can't just say tobacco. I think in terms of kids, we're not as concerned about, as you might be with adults, of saying this is a way to help people stop smoking. That's one of the many things that data are out about. And that they really are marketing them a lot to kids with various flavors, flavorings, and a lot of sweet and fruity kinds of things. So I guess at this point, I just wanted to bring it up and see sort of what other people were thinking about that. Where we left it before was until we had FDA regulation, we didn't feel comfortable talking about it, talking about, recommending that schools consider sort of banning it. But I guess I have come around to a different point for the schools in particular because of thinking of caution in regard to kids. So I don't know what other people think about that.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I was just around somebody who was smoking one of those e-cigarettes, and it was fairly unpleasant anyway. And I think it's not unreasonable to put that, into school law, so to speak. I think it's a fine idea. I guess my question would be, what are our next steps in making a recommendation to? Is it the school board? Is it to the commissioners? How do we go about that?
Well, I think part of our thing, and it's Kevin hasn't been able to come to the past couple of meetings, so there is a school it's a tobacco policy. So that was we were really sort of turfing that to him, and I guess now since you're here, we're turfing it to you to say we'd like whoever makes up the policy to, one, look at that tobacco policy, consider going to the wording of tobacco-free campus as opposed to the current thing, which just parcels out different situations where you can't be smoking, but to go to a whole tobacco-free campus, and to consider putting in e-cigarettes as being included in that. So can you press your microphone light so is it on?
Oh, there it is. No, I think that would have to be presented to the school board, and I'll relay it to Kevin, and then they would have to, develop the policy or change it. But I agree with you also. Now, are you also talking about tobacco education? You're talking about a tobacco-free campus. Are you also talking about incorporating it into the curriculum?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like our main concern was the e-cigarettes, but certainly, we also have been talking with our, intern about different projects for the school, and that's not one that has come up at this point, but maybe that's one for our September intern to consider.
Okay, I'll relay that to Kevin.
But if we want to talk about that further, I'm more than happy to talk too.
All right.
Okay, so I guess I will make a formal motion that we would like the policy arm of the, school that develops and revisits policies to consider moving to tobacco-free campuses for the wording of the current tobacco policy, and to consider including e-cigarettes in that, and to get back to us with their response to those two requests.
Okay.
I guess for us to request that, do we need to show evidence of any kind to them? How does the board consider these types of changes in the regulations?
Well, I'm saying that the science is not clear on e-cigarettes. It's not clear on do they help people to stop smoking? Is it a gateway to smoking? Or is vaping harmful to people around you? So I'm saying the science is debatable. So I'm not saying, yes, I'm going to provide evidence that e-cigarettes are harmful to the public health. What I'm saying is there is a sort of decent chance they are, that for sure they are being marketed to teens, with this abundance of caution idea related to child health, I think it's reasonable to move ahead with it. There's, I mean, yes, there's a lot of, there is certainly a lot of, evidence on the issue, but I would not hold it to a high scientific standard at this point to do what I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I think that I completely agree with you, actually. I don't think we should have e-cigarettes or anything on campuses from a public health standpoint, whether it's school or elsewhere in a large situation, especially since the evidence is not there yet. I guess my question was, what is the procedure for asking this type of request? Like, should we put together a document from the Board of Health saying, these are our reasons for saying this, because of lack of evidence of their effectiveness in tobacco cessation, because, we think that maybe the public health hazard of introducing e-cigarettes to young children may actually have the opposite effect, which is to promote smoking, are our reasons for doing this. I'm not sure if that's a procedure we need to follow.
Would you be willing to do that for our next meeting?
Sure. I don't mind putting that together.
The one thing I was going to say is that, that document would be important, and that I think that we're announcing that we're going to review that document at the next meeting, so there could be public participation. Then we can have the vote on it and say, yes, we'd like to present this to the school board, and I think we would be pretty good that way.
That sounds good. Thank you.
And anyone who wants input, I'm happy to hear it.
Do you need a subcommittee?
Okay, so we will review that at our next meeting and have public input. And maybe in the meantime, you could find out what the process would be. So that would be great. Thank you all. Okay, and now, Dr. Donato, NBs.
Is there any way to get it up onto there? I don't know if that's something that we need to do. I don't know if, and there it is. That's great. Okay, well, like we were talking about at our last meeting, we were going to have a presentation on colony collapse disorder, which is an issue with honeybees in particular. Most of my patients are usually have 4 legs or even 2, but 6 is pretty uncommon. But we'll talk about this here. So, colony collapse disorder affects honeybees, and it was noted in 2006 that there was a significant loss of bees in hives, 30 to 90% loss we would see, but you'd see a live queen for the most part and no dead bees. So in essence, it just looked as if everybody decided to scatter and nobody would come back. There were a lot of theories on what was happening, some of which we'll go over right now. Give you a little history on that. This isn't the first time that we've seen some significant losses in honeybees. There were losses significant in a few periods of time, 1880s, 1920s. Those times they actually referred to as a disappearing bee disease, and they seem to be most similar to what's happening now, but really there was no evidence of what was going on at that time, probably from lack of certain scientific tests. It was probably a challenge at that point, plus record keeping isn't what it is today as well. Also happened in the 60s. 1995, 96, beekeepers in Pennsylvania lost about half of their bees, which was pretty incredible. But none of these episodes could be linked together or linked to what's happening today. Just is a concern. We see this seems to be a cyclical issue. Whether they're all related, again, we're not sure. What are the causes of CCD, colony collapse disorder? As of the moment, nobody truly knows, and that is frustrating for everybody involved. It's frustrating for the beekeepers, it's frustrating for the departments of agriculture, which, by the way, most of this information came from the Department of Agriculture, so directly from the government. But it was thought at one point to be infectious, but then they were not able to fulfill Koch's postulates, which say that you should be able to take disease from one animal, isolate it, and be able to culture it, grow it, and then put it into another animal, and then it shows signs of disease. That's not something that they've been able to do, and that's an important aspect of all of this to know, because when we head to some of the different causes, that didn't show up as nicely as I would like. That's nosema. It's a type of fungus. Now, this has been found in a number of the colonies. The interesting part, just following basic fundamentals of veterinary medicine, is that typically fungi do not cause primary disease. They're usually opportunists, but we're seeing this a lot with the colony collapse disorder. So this was one suspect at one point. And then there's a number of different viruses, and that, again, not coming through as great as I'd like, is Israeli acute paralysis virus, and that's a beautiful picture of what that virus is supposed to look like. But again, usually if you have one infectious organism responsible for the issue at hand, you can again infect others once you culture it out of an originally ill animal. So that is not the case. So this is one of the suspects as well. And this one is interesting. I'll see if I can point to them. You can see right here and right here, those are mites, and they are thought to be part of colony collapse disorder as well. And they're pretty gross, but they do transmit disease, and all those little bugs are not good.
They wouldn't usually be there in a healthy bee?
Well, and that's interesting because they mainly find them in the CCD colonies, but in this particular case, you can see these in colonies not affected as well, where most of the bees are there and present. But this does tend to have a high abundance in CCD. So what are some other issues? And we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, some environmental factors. Cold winters seem to be particularly devastating to bees and are linked to CCD. If there happens to be droughts, lack of available nectar, pollen, seems to be issues as well. And then you have hive management issues. This is, as I was learning originally about some of this, it really reminded me a lot of a conversation we've actually already had about chickens, where we were saying happy chickens produce and they tend to do well. Well, when you have poor hive management, you do tend to see other diseases coming in and affecting everybody as a whole. So that's also another issue here. The disease is probably a combination of all of these factors. Because again, usually when there's one thing, one etiologic agent, you can identify it for the most part. But again, these guys kind of remind me of the chickens a little bit. Maybe they're not being kept as well as they should be. Maybe there's a particularly bad winter or a drought or not available food source. And then you throw in some mites that maybe might be carrying other diseases, some of these other viruses, and then you get a big breakout, and all of a sudden you're losing hives in significant numbers. So it's probably multifactorial. And that's what everybody is believing at this point. As far as other environmental factors, pesticides have been brought up. And again, while nobody can link directly to pesticides, some of them, again, throw that on top of a mite infestation, along with a virus in there, along with a drought. It's going to take its toll. So maybe it would seem that the pesticides used to control the mites could also be just a little factor, just playing a little bit of a role. So that's why it's probably hard to figure this out. So why is this even a problem? Why do we have to be concerned? Of course, bee pollination is a huge factor in our crop value. It's literally 15 billion increase just from bee pollination per year. It's pretty incredible. I didn't realize that. 15 billion of an increase. They are very, very important for tree nuts, fruits, and vegetables, and the pollination of that crop. The almond industry uses about 1.4 million colonies, and that's in California. We'll see probably about 60% of the use of honeybees in the United States. So it's something that we really have to be concerned about. And so what can we do? And I wanted to keep this short because I figured we were going to run up against the clock. So if anybody has more questions afterwards, certainly ask. But what can we do in the meanwhile? Well, beekeepers, they have to practice best management practices. That's really important. Again, kind of can compare it to the chickens that we were talking about. Happy bees are productive bees, and that's important. Continued research, of course. Let's try and identify the exact causes. It's going to be challenging, but I think it can be done. And as far as the public goes, of course, education is always one of the things we talk about with everything that we discuss here at the Board of Health. No pesticides when you can avoid them, particularly midday. That's really important because that's when they're most active, and you don't want to be spraying and knock off a whole bunch of honeybees. And then you can plant bee-friendly plants, as Dr. Leader probably knows. Many of these in the garden in Radnor, we have foxglove, red clover, bee balm, Joe Pye weed. There's a whole bunch, there's a list, a number of them that you can do. And that can help as well. Obviously, the ones that we're seeing are more, I don't want to say they're individuals, but individual hives, as opposed to the agricultural end of the honeybee population. But certainly anything we can do to help is always a good thing. So I hope that was informative, and if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
I have two questions. One is, could you just talk in a little bit more detail about what happens with CCP? Just the process. And my second question is there by any chance a silver lining to this with the decrease in yellow jackets?
Well, the interesting part to the what actually happens, so making reference to many moons ago, they end up just disappearing for the most part. So it's very challenging. That's one of the problems of identifying this, because we're catching, the ones we're catching, maybe they have a load of mites, maybe they have fungus. Are these really the problems at hand? And so what happens? There's death, and they're gone. And we don't know if they, at one point it was thought they would become neurologic and kind of not be able to use their honing skills to get back to the hive. That's one of the thoughts. But ultimately, I hate to say, we're just assuming death at this point. And they've taken some of the bees that have passed and again tried to culture things out, and it becomes very challenging. So mainly death is the, I hate to say, the number one sign. And as far as the yellow jacket implication, I'm not that much up on that, so I would have to defer to someone who knows more about that than I do. Great.
Excellent. Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. That's terrific. When you were saying that fungus is not usually a primary thing, with white nose syndrome with bats, isn't fungus the problem? Or they don't know about that
There-
either, whether it's just a sort of, taking advantage of a susceptible animal?
Right, and that's an interesting point because with white nose syndrome, yes, they're culturing fungus off them. You can actually see it growing on them. But a lot of people don't believe, a lot of veterinarians, Department of Agriculture, a lot of them do not believe that's the primary cause, although it's the only thing we're finding. And that would be more, even if that were the primary pathogen, that's more the exception than the rule. So could this be an exception with the CCD? Sure. Unlikely, though, especially since we're finding so many other, particularly the mites.
Thank you very much. And I do see a member of the public here. Would the member of the public like to comment?
I'm Sarah Pilling from Garrett Hill and one of the founders of the Skunk Hollow Community Garden. Originally, the hives up at Skunk Hollow were done by the Agnes Irwin Girls Hives for Lives. In 2011, the bees were gone. Beaupre Apiary, which is in Rosemont, then provided bees because we wanted them for the community garden. We wanted them for a whole host of reasons, but not the least of which was for pollination. We have now lost them 2 years in a row. For the winter of 2012, they disappeared. There were no bees in the hive. The hives were loaded with honey. I know they do really good management, and they had traps for mites, and they demonstrated a lot of this to the children. Amy's son was just absolutely fascinated by it. This past year, the hive is full of honey and full of dead bees. So we have made the unhappy decision that we will not have hives up at Skunk Hollow until we begin to get a larger idea of what's going on. The Beaupre Apiary thinks that one theory is that these neonicotinoids, which is a pesticide that's now been integrated in a lot of herbicides, a lot of fungicides, weaken the bees. The neonics are drenched on the ground, but they get up into the plant and they get up into the pollen. And their theory, and it's only their theory, is that the neonicotinoids become concentrated in the honey. And when in the winter they begin to feed off the honey because the landscape is dormant, that they're getting a lethal dose, and what it's doing is weakening them, and then something else comes in. We're really sad that we're not going to have the bees. They were a great asset to us, to the garden, but it was a great teaching moment to the kids. It was a wonderful asset for the garden. But I think of the 14 hives that are here in Radnor Township, only 2 of them have survived. It's a very, very serious issue.
There are some good numbers just recently. We'll see what they look like after this winter, but the mortality rate has dropped in 2013. Now, some are theorizing that it has to do with the mild winter that we had last year.
Right.
So, and again, that goes back to the multifactorial reasons
Right.
of, having CCD. But so it would really be interesting to see what happens this year after we've had a punishing winter.
Right.
It would be nice to see if the numbers were coming up, then hopefully we're through one of those,
Right.
we're going to ebb and flow out of it.
And the other issue I've read is that the big box stores are drenching the soil of their transplants with a fungicide that has neonicotinoids in it. So is that going to balance it out and make it worse? Because it's going to be almost impossible to grow plants unless you start them from seed yourself that isn't going to have this pesticide in it. The other thing I wanted to mention, and it's not in Radnor Township, and it's only 2 weeks old, but But I think it'd be a great site for a nutritionist. I don't know how many of you have been to Mom's Organic Market, where Borders was in Bryn Mawr. And they're very interested in organics and sustainability. And they're actually working with a commercial outfit in Wilmington, and all their vegetable garbage and many of their products are in compostable. They have a bio bin behind the store, and about every 3 weeks, the outfit in Wilmington comes and gets it. It's all digested and becomes compost, and then it's being marketed. And it's a pretty interesting teaching tool for kids to see that garbage is not garbage. And of course, it keeps it, the more vegetable garbage that doesn't go in the landfill, the healthier the landfill is, because it actually doesn't help. Apparently, it's quite a source of methane gas, which of course we don't want because of climate change. So if you haven't been to Mom's, I urge you to go. It's pretty fantastic. Sorry it's not in Radnor, but guess what? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Agnes, any updates from the school that you know? Do you know, are you going to be coming to the next meeting, or?
Not that I know of. I was just filling in for Kevin today. He wasn't able to make it. If he would like me to come again, that would be fine.
Okay. I mean, it is very important for us to have somebody from the school here as well from the Board of Commissioners. It would be very helpful to have our liaison back.
Particularly if next month we're going to be talking about school policy. I think it would be really great if you or Kevin could definitely be here.
Yeah, I will tell him. Definitely one of us will be here.
Thank you. Any other, and Dr. Saldivar, I just want to say, it would be for the thing about writing something up, I think if you refer both to the Philadelphia Inquirer, the op-ed from Walter Sue, TSOU, on e-cigarettes, and also the article from Don Sapatkin on e-cigarettes. They're both within the last week. Because they had a lot of summaries of the research. That might be a good place to start. Our next meeting, Monday, April 21st, 2014, 5 p.m. in this room. If you're not going to make it, please let me know. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.